Well, it is a brand new year here at 52 Qs, and I've begun my ongoing quest to submit one Q per week up to Taxi and follow the progress of those submissions all throughout the year. So today, I thought it'd be a good idea to start the year by talking about reading the bleeping brief, because a good brief, or listing as Taxi calls them, has within it everything we need to know to get us writing and give us the best chance of success and even a forward. Plus, we're going to listen through my first submission in my year of Taxi, and we're also going to feature a Q written by a member of the 52 Qs community on this week's episode of the 52 Qs podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Qs podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, we take a listen to the latest submission in my year of Taxi and check in on any forwards or returns. And this week, we're going to be taking a listen to Entered into Evidence, which is a pulsing investigative tension cue. Plus, we also feature a cue written by you, a member of the 52 Qs community. And this week, we're going to be taking a listen to a dark, moody EDM cue written by Rolf Schild. So you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad to have you with me. I know you have a ton of options out there, so just thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I also have to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Qs who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything going. We are 100% community supported, so if you like what I do here, don't thank me, thank them. But if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Qs and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So it's the year of Taxi, and I'm going to be checking in every week. And this week's submission, it's the first submission, and it's called Entered into Evidence. And as I think I mentioned last week, I'm using Asana, which is a project management tool, to kind of track all of these cues across their lifespan. And at the end of the year, we're going to check in and see what the results are. So I've already submitted this cue called Entered into Evidence, and it is an investigative tension cue. And let's actually pull up the brief itself. And the brief itself says, please submit top-tier investigative tension instrumentals that could add to the suspenseful and dramatic energy of an investigative scene in a crime show. They're looking for compelling motifs, pulsing rhythms, and slick arrangements in the general wheelhouse of the references. Your instrumentation can include orchestral or electronic instruments, or a combination of both. Just be sure that they have plenty of forward motion, interest, and a subtle sense of dynamics. Keeping your motifs on the simpler side is recommended. Your production should be polished, and any virtual sounds or samples you use need to be high quality. So they're looking for 2 minutes, don't copy, and then some information about the deal itself. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit later in today's episode. In fact, it's kind of what today's episode's about, which is understanding these briefs and using Taxi briefs as kind of the standard, if you will, or just really good examples of briefs, because Taxi briefs are some of the best in the business. And I wish some libraries I've worked with, I wish they would be as descriptive. But don't get me wrong, I work with libraries who give amazing briefs, but sometimes Taxi just has so much information that they're really, really good to use, So the cue that I wrote, like I said, is called Entered into Evidence, and is a pulsing tension cue. So let's take a listen to it, and then we'll talk about it. right, so that was entered into evidence. And as I listen back, the only thing I'm really worried about that might get me a return, and we'll see, is the motif. Now I do have a simple motif, just that descending very kind of Stranger Thingsy vibe to it. But I'm a little worried that maybe the melody isn't quite strong enough, but I'm hoping we'll see. We'll see. The references that they sent along, one was a Mac Quail reference, which was Mr. Robot, which is a scored TV show. So we have to be careful when using references from scored material, because that track isn't a production music track. And so we can't just copy the form. This also happens when we get popular music artists and those kind of things. The other track here, Investigation, Connor, is a game soundtrack from like Detroit Become Human, or well, I guess I could just click on it and look. I can't play it because I don't want to get, yeah, Detroit Become Human, it's a game soundtrack. And so again, not production music. So we can use it for vibe and tone, mood, atmosphere, instrumentation, harmonic language, all of that. But what we can't do is just copy the form, because that's not going to work for editors. And then this last one was a production music track. And so one of the things I noticed in the references was a lot of use of piano. Like piano was consistent across all of those. And so that tells me that's kind of effervescing into whoever, I guess, the screener is going to be, or the library itself. So that was entered into evidence. If you want to see a full breakdown, as in opening up the Logic session, talking about all the sounds, that is something that is available to the friends and family subscribers over at 52Qs. And so you can join us over there if you want to see how that cue was put together. So that was submission number 1 in my year of taxi. I will be following it along, and we'll see if this gets moved over into the forwards pile or the returns pile. And if so, we'll track it, and I'll continue to let you know how that goes. So, reading the bleeping brief, and I've moved my sign permanently back to there, and that is a sign of this T-shirt. And by the way, these shirts, and which were created by Shannon, and the sign, the poster, and all that's all available in our shop that you can check out. The whole concept of reading the bleeping brief, this happened, or I got this going to a demo derby at Production Music Conference. And I think I talked about this in the PMC wrap-up, but it was a demo derby where folks were submitting the cues that they had written for music supervisors or sync agents or whatever to listen to and give feedback, not unlike what I do here every week, for our 52Qs members. That's what I do when I do feedback videos and all of that. But so we're in there and we're listening, and cue after cue was coming up, and folks were just missing key elements from the brief that weren't being translated into their cue. And so it started out kind of nice. And there's this one gentleman who was from the UK, and he's like, I will attempt a really bad English accent here in a second, but he's like, you got to read the brief. You have to read the brief. The brief says this. Yours doesn't have this specific thing the brief asked for. And by the end of it, I felt like he was getting a little frustrated, or maybe just wanted to hammer it home. And he's just like, read the bloody brief. And my apologies for swearing for you British folks. And so talking about this, and just the idea of creating like a mantra, just read the brief. It's all there. Read the bleeping brief. Effing brief, bloody brief, however. And so that's where this kind of started. And that's what got me thinking about this topic. And we actually have a workshop about reading the brief and decoding briefs coming up a little bit later in the month. I think it's January 30th, a workshop. But reading the brief, so much of what we need to know is in the brief. And I want to use taxi listings not as a commercial for Taxi, right? Because I'm paying my $5 to Taxi, right? And this whole year of Taxi thing isn't just shilling for Taxi. I did reach out to Michael and said, hey, I want to do this. I didn't need his permission, but I gave him a heads up, and I'm going to be as transparent and honest as possible. And at the end of the year, we have 52 data points to draw from, and we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But so using Taxi briefs, Taxi, even if you're not a Taxi subscriber, Taxi puts these listings and these briefs out here, which are a gold mine of information, of reference material, of understanding what libraries are looking for. So even if you never give Taxi a nickel, which totally fine, the briefs are a gold mine, a treasure trove of listing information. And so I've got it zoomed in really big here so it's easy to see. Usually when you sign in, it looks a little bit more like this. And I always go to my instrumental listings here. And so much information, zoom back in, is in these briefs. So much information is in these briefs, and I've lost track. All right, so here we go. Here's one that's called Indie Pop Instrumentals. I'm not a pop guy, but the reference material, the first thing you should do is get those reference materials, bookmark them, do whatever, but check out the reference material. And so they're saying send them current sounding indie pop instrumentals or cues. Now, there's been some confusion that I've heard from some members of what instrumentals or cues means. And my understanding is instrumental is a full length, like a three to 3.5 minute track that has typical song form structure. So like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, end. Whereas cues tend to be a little bit more, or let me say it this way, a little less song formy, right? So it might just be A and a bigger A and then a breakdown A and then another A kind of a thing. So cues are less form diverse, if that's and if the Taxi folk is listening, please let me know. But there's been some confusion in the community about that. So with plenty of fun, feel-good energy that could work well for a variety of sync placements. All right, so let's stop there. So current sounding, that means you need to be listening not just to the references that were given, but go out and listen to some Spotify. Go find some YouTube or whatever. Find some current sounding pop music. And what are some consistencies that you're seeing across the different references? So plenty of fun, feel-good energy. Fun usually means kind of poppy and bouncy, good energy, fast tempos. And fun, you're going to want to probably be in a major key. Probably be in a major key. So when you see fun, it's not saying we can't have fun in a minor key, but when you see fun in a brief, you probably mean a minor key, or a major key, I'm sorry. Hooky motifs, engaging grooves, and solid arrangement with plenty of dynamics, interest, forward motion, and layers. All right, so hooky motifs. These need short, repeated melodies. So not long, 8-bar, motifs, nothing through composed, but super repetitive, short, not many notes, engaging grooves. So probably dancey, right? Don't get too creative. Just nice backbeats, 2 and 4, solid arrangements with plenty of dynamics. All right, so this means that we probably need to have like breakdown sections. And if I'm looking at the waveform, it gets big, it gets small, all of those kind of things. It shouldn't look like a toothpaste waveform where it's just you're crushing and pinning the needle the whole time. Forward motion, that means tempo, and maybe some syncopation. And layers, so it needs to be a dense mix. So not just one sound of a snare, but maybe a snare plus a clap, maybe dense layers of synths. And the more layers you have, then the more options you have for your arrangement. Modern pop instrumentation in the general wheelhouse of the references will work best. So this is going back to the references and listen to them all and identify. First of all, do an analysis of your references. And I know that some of them are artists. Some of them are buried in the background of a scene from Love and Hip Hop Miami or whatever, and it's really tough to see it. That's kind of the job. That's the gig. So do a harmonic analysis. What chords are you hearing? How fast are those chords moving? Are they major or are they minor? Are they extended chords with sevenths and ninths, or are they pretty much all just standard diatonic, playing it very, very nice and safe? What instruments are you hearing? What's the tempo? Do an inventory of each reference, and then take all the references and look at them and find the through lines. For Entered into Evidence, the 3 references all had piano. And so that tells me that whoever was putting those references together, piano was a common theme there. So I put a piano in my cue. Done. Is there a common tempo? Is there a common rhythmic value that keeps showing up more and more? And if there is, like if they're all within 5 BPM, then set your cue to one of those tempos. Don't even think about it. Just do it. Set your tempo to the cue and move on. Dial up the sounds that you're hearing in all of the cues and move on. Now, as far as form, like I mentioned earlier, we have to be really careful extracting form from references like this, because if they're not production music tracks, then the form is probably not going to work. Now, for this specific one, because it's a pop reference and looking for pop placements, and they're okay with instrumentals or cues, then you could be okay to use a pop track, a commercially released record, as a form. But for production music, nah. You can't do that. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to use the references given for harmonic language, instrumental language, rhythmic language, motivic, melody, all of that stuff. And then I'll actually go to a library, an actual library, and find references and use those for some form. You do that enough and the form kind of gets baked in, like you just learn the form. And so form becomes significantly less of an issue when you go down. Okay. So this cue is looking for 90 seconds long or 2 to 4 minutes for instrumentals. And this reinforces that idea that cues are less form diverse, so it's a production music cue with building layers, every phrase that break down about, 2/3 of the way through, and then you push forward after the breakdown, whereas about 2 to 4 minutes for your instrumentals tells me that that's essentially a song or song form with no vocals. The challenge of doing that, and what we have to be careful with, and I see this with hip hop cues as well, you can't just write the thing you're always used to writing. If you're used to having vocals, you can't just write that, strip out the vocals and call it a day, because the vocals bring rhythmic and melodic energy into the cue that without those are missing from an instrumental version. So you can't just strip those out necessarily. So you have to replace that melodic and rhythmic energy somehow. I see this all the time with hip hop cues. All right, so we know that it needs to be about 90 seconds or 2 to 4 minutes. And for me, I try to hit within 5 to 10 seconds of the listing. And I've had returns where I thought they asked for 2 minutes and I gave them 1:45, and that was a return because I thought it was long enough. So a 2-minute cue, if they ask for 2 minutes, then I'll give them between 1:50 and 2 minutes and 10 seconds. That's my goal. That's what I'll shoot for. I get as close to 2 minutes as I can, within reason. Then 2 to 4 minutes, I would give him a 3-minute cue right there, right down the middle. So that was a pop cue. Let's look. I'm going to go back here at the top. I'm going to click over into dispatch listings and see here. Here's another one. This is one from next week. This is one that I will be working on next week. Quirky orchestral dramedy cues are needed by a music licensing company looking for general ballpark, and they have some references here. Please submit well-composed dramedy instrumental cues that could add humor and lighthearted energy to the lightly dramatic scenes in reality TV shows like Real Housewife. Quirky motifs, engaging arrangements, and plenty of dynamics, interest, and forward motion are all needed by this request. Top-notch orchestral instrumentation in the general wheelhouse of the references will suit your submissions best. And then polished virtual samples, blah, blah. All right, let's unpack this. Dramedy cues, pizzicato strings. I'm gonna load them up. It doesn't say not to use them, and I've seen them. No pizzicato dramedy, but pizzicato is the name of the game. So load it in. As soon as I see dramedy, I try to use pizzicato. Humor, lighthearted energy. Okay, so this means that it's not going to be overly minor, and lighthearted, probably major, hint of minor, right? This is the dramedy landscape as we know it. Quirky motifs, so very rhythmically syncopated, not really dour if it's in a minor key. And typically it'll be in a minor key, but flirt with a lot of major tonality. The other thing I love to do with dramedy is chromatic motion. So I'll have a minor 1 chord, but go up to the flat major 2 chord, right? The Neapolitan tritone substitution, however you want to think about it. That flat 2 in a major, and it creates really interesting harmonic shenanigans. So quirky motifs, plucky, rhythmic, syncopated, boop, bleep, 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 bloop, that type of thing. Engaging arrangements, which tells me that you can't just like set a loop and go. And this also tells me I could probably get away with a lot of starts and stops in the cue as well, which works well for dramedy. Bleak, pleek, plink, pleek, triangle, vibroslap, flexitone, all these kind of little quirky sounds. Plenty of dynamics. Here we see this again. This means it can't be that toothpaste crushed waveform. The waveform should look like it's building and like ebbing and flowing, building and releasing, or not building and collapsing. I don't know the opposite of building there. Forward motion. This is a rhythmic indicator, right? It can't just be kind of laid back and slow. It needs to be faster, on the faster side of things. Polished virtual sounds. All right, so should be about 2 minutes long. That means I'm going to give between 1 minute 50 and 2 minutes and 10 seconds with a non-faded button stinger ending. Okay, and then I should say that this goes on to say don't copy references in any way, shape, or form. I think this is getting into cloning. Like we don't want to clone these references. We don't want to submit something that sounds like a knockoff of that. We don't want to do that. And so this is one that I am composing this week. Probably later today, I think, because I've not started writing it, but this will be done before it closes on Wednesday. So yeah, and then the rest of it's kind of boilerplate. Now I want to take a moment to talk about references from Taxi. And I didn't discover this until I went to the Road Rally, which is this. Taxi provides the references for the listings unless the listing says these references were given directly from the library. I'm going to say that again. Taxi provides the references from the listings unless the listing says the library gave these. And they'll say in like italics, directly from the library. And that's important to note because it will explain why certain references kind of show up over and over across listings, especially, I mean, they're wearing out those Matt Coyle references. But it also explains how you will get 3 references which are production tracks, or you might get 2 from Matt Coyle, one that's a production track, and one I remember seeing a while ago that was from like an episode of SWAT, and it was a fully scored, I mean, that's a scored show, and the reference was dynamically and energetically all over the scene because it was all over the place because it was kind of a chase scene, I think. And that came through the community and it created a ton of confusion. But what I think we have to be careful with is when we're working with references, whether they're provided by Taxi or provided by the library. I think especially if they're provided by Taxi, we have to be careful not to drill down on one reference and use that to anchor our own submissions. That's where I think we get into trouble, especially knowing that these are provided by Taxi. These aren't from the library. And I don't know if the reference folks are the same people as the screener folks. I would hope that they communicate. I would hope that they, that they talk to each other and say, "Hey, this is the reference," and yeah, part of what I want to explore through my whole year of Taxi is processing the returns, putting it out there. What do you think? And having an ongoing discussion about this whole process. But when you get a reference and you drill down on one, and you're like, I based my cue off of this one reference, I think that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous because if you miss the mark, or if the screener or the gatekeeper decision maker, if you're not communicating the thing that they hear, or they want to hear in their mind, then that's a return. But if you take across all of the references, find the through lines, and then insert that into your cue, I think you have a much better chance of success. And so for this dramedy cue, this dramedy search, I know that there's pizzicato in all of them, which is great. Yep. And I also know that there are no real like hip hop beats, if memory serves me. It's been a couple of days since I pulled these references. So my usual go-to with my dramedy, and what I've had a lot of success with dramedy, is hip-hop dramedy. But that's not what this is. This is more straight-ahead orchestral dramedy. So I have to be personally careful with that, and not to overproduce it and turn it into something that they're not looking for. So let's find one more. I'm going to stick in the instrumental category. And there's a soca search. There's a pop instrumentals that we had. Old school hip hop. All right. Here is a hip hop one. Feel good old school style hip hop instrumental cues. Mid to up tempo instrumental cues in the general wheelhouse. So we have a DoorDash commercial and we have some commercial releases. So all 3 of these references, none of them are a production track from top to bottom. The commercial is going to be edited, or it's going to be composed itself, like scored, but it's probably a production track that's brought in and edited. So we can't use it for form. The commercial records have vocals, but they're looking for instrumentals. So we can't just copy the beat and call it a day, because without the vocals, then we're missing the rhythmic and melodic energy that we're going to need. The other thing is that if you strip, this is just using hip hop references. If you study the beat, the backing track of a commercially released hip hop record, it's probably going to be way too repetitive for a production music usage. Because when you have vocals and you have a rapper on top, The vocals are really communicating the song sections and telling us and telling us where we are and when things are moving and changing from verse to chorus and all of that. And so you can get away with a 1-bar loop essentially for a full hip hop track. Folks are winning Grammys and going platinum with just like a 2-bar loop. But for production music, we really can't do that. So we have to be careful when we're referencing hip hop. We can't just copy the beat and say, well, that's enough, because without the vocals, we're missing a lot of information. All right, so let's dig into this brief. Send them well-produced hip-hop instrumental cues brimming with tons of emotionally uplifting, feel-good energy and vibes that could work well for TV commercials. So just stop right there. Well-produced hip-hop instrumental brimming with tons of emotionally uplifting, feel-good energy. Major key. Major key. Right there. That's our harmonic indicator. Feel good energy, up tempo, fast, bouncy. So we're not going to be talking about like really low tempo or fast tempo, dependent, like trap, that's like at 50 beats per minute or something like that. All these little stutters and everything. Probably not that. Because they should have memorable motifs, engaging rhythms, solid arrangements, and plenty of old school hip hop appeal. Now, how old school do we want to go? This is where the references would come in handy. Because old school means different things to different people in different age groups. When I think old school, I think like 80s, 70s, and 80s, sampled based hip hop. Chopping samples like they did long before Serato sample. But folks a generation behind me, old school would be like West Coast gangster rap. That's old school. And so we would listen to the references to figure that out. And that dictates a ton of instrumental and sound choices. And it even an approach, how. Now, 90s hip hop is very sampled, but the lead lines are much different. And so you just have to figure out using the references. Hip hop instrumentation in the general wheelhouse of the references will work best. So that's what it's just saying. Craft your cues around a central motif and create forward motion, interest, and dynamics by layering instrumentation in and out as they progress. So this is standard hip hop form and hip hop structure, where it's building loops and building density as you go and then pulling energy back. Right? This isn't going to be a long, sprawling phrase. Keep it simple. Keep it really, really straightforward. But they also say avoid anything too looped sounding. And so looped sounding tells me that I can't get away with just a 1-bar idea. I mean, hip hop is intrinsically loop based, sampled based. So I wouldn't don't make it sound too looped to say, oh, I can't use loops or I can't use repeated ideas. No, because then you're pushing outside of hip hop, and good luck with that. But what I can't do is just a 1-bar idea and then just loop it for days. So just be careful when you see that. Don't swing in the opposite direction. So please be sure your production and any virtual instruments are high quality. So if it's a sampled sound, then you're using horns, then you need to make them sound like horns. Quick tip for folks out there. I would resample your horns. So if you're using native instruments like session horns or something, if you just use them as virtual instruments in your cue, then they might sound a little fake, a little MIDI-y, because they are. And those types of instruments can be really challenging to play or to have sound realistic. But what you can do is you can make the performance, render that as audio, and then bring it into something like Serato Sample or Sampler, or if you're an Ableton Sampler or whatever. Or you can just chop up the audio and treat it the way a hip hop producer would treat a sample. And so things like cutting off the audio tails, things like reverbs not carrying through, making it sound unapologetically sampled will help to cover the fact that it is unapologetically MIDI. Yep. Especially if you throw like some RC20 on it, or make it sound kind of lo-fi and or make it sound gritty and a little distortion. Yeah, what you don't necessarily want, and this is a little off topic, but I'm here. I'm in these weeds, so I got to swing my way out. What you don't want it necessarily sound like is like you've hired a horn section to show up in your track. You want it to sound like you found a nice horn sample in a record that nobody's heard before. So like, for example, anytime I do like big orchestral hip hop cues, especially with big brass blats and these horns and Brahms and stuff, it sounds a little inauthentic to just load up horn samples like Cinebrass or something like that. Because that sounds like I have brass players in my session, but what I really need is I need a sampled sound. So I will resample that and then treat it the same way I would any other sample that I got off of Splice. So anyway, that's a little moment. The more you know moment for you. All right. So your submissions should be about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And so I would give them 2 minutes, give or take. That's a really nice comfy window there. And then your boilerplate information. So that's how to read the brief. Take it word by word and let each word of the brief tell you something musically. The challenge for you is learning how to translate those things, how to translate the brief into musical information. And that's what we're all here to learn. So it's a combination of reading the brief, doing your homework, doing your study, but above all, don't just write what you want to write and try to shoehorn it into the listing, whether it's Taxi or whether it's another library. They're sending a brief out the same way that a customer goes to a restaurant and orders off the menu. They put an order for a cheeseburger and you give them a hot dog. It's not what they ordered. It might be the best hot dog, but they're telling you what they want. And sometimes, folks are so off base. Somebody orders a hamburger and they return, like a school bus. What am I supposed to do with the school bus? I'm hungry. So the brief tells us what they want and what they're looking for. And so just read the brief. Read the bloody brief. It's all there, friends. All right. So what do you think? What about you? What's your experience with reading the briefs, whether it's Taxi or whether it's with your other libraries? And what do you do? I'm asking, what do you do if you don't have a brief? How do you handle that? What if the brief is notoriously thin? I'd love to hear from you and hear what you think. Let me know in the comments below. I do read all those comments and I make every effort to respond. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to hear from Mrs. 52Qs talking about the community and how you can join us. And when we come back, we're going to be listening to a dark EDM cue by Rolf Schild.
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52Qs podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52Qs isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52 Cues community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52cues.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52cues.com.
All right, that was Dark Odyssey by Rolf Schild. Rolf, thank you so much for sending this along. Really appreciate that. He sent this during our week one feedback thread. And if you want to submit your own cues for feedback, then you can check us out over at 52 Cues. So I really enjoyed this, and this was a listing for Dark Moody EDM instrumentals. This was a Taxi listing, and I love that you even mentioned you don't have much experience in or any experience in EDM, and this is just the start of the cue. But I wanted to feature it. First of all, good on you. Bravo for swinging at something that you've not done before. That's the only way we learn and grow is by trying new things. The first takeaway, and I like this, very good sound selection. I think we're in good shape here, but we're crushingly loud. We got up into like -9 LUFS and -4s for the RMS, and so it's really crushing. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit, and you can actually, if you look at the waveform, you can see how kind of crushed it is. And anytime, and this is what I meant earlier when I said toothpaste waveform, this is what I'm talking about, how all of the peaks and everything are just completely crushed. And so I would start by just bringing it down. If you're not given a loudness, then I shoot for -12 or so, -12 LUFS if I'm not given a loudness. This right here out of the gate, there was this really interesting, super high-pitched sound that came through, this resonance that was kind of piercing right here, right around 3K. And I feel like it was a little, little rough. I couldn't tell if it was my tinnitus, my ear ringing kicking in, or so I'd be really careful. And you can see how much higher than everything else is. Now, by the way, I'm using the Pro Q3. It's really fantastic. And yeah, I'm not sponsored by FabFilter, but it is arguably one of the best EQs in the business. And what I like about it is this frequency freeze kind of feature. And I know this is just the beginning of the cue, but the disparity between the highest, like the high end of the peak to the everything else, that's where we have to be careful with resonances. is see how much higher that one resonance is from everything else. And so I would be really careful with that. I think we're in good shape here. Did the brief mention how long it needed to be? Right. So we're about 30 seconds in, and I feel like this intro is a little bit too long. I mean, if this were a 5, 6, or 7 minute DJ EDM track, then you can get away with these super long intros. But something tells me we're taking a little bit too much time to get on with it. Yeah, this all feels like intro. Which could be fine if they're okay with a 4-minute track or something, but if they're looking for a cue, this is going to be too long. It's perfect for EDM, and this is one of those things where if you reference a commercially released EDM track, that you can get away with a 50-second intro. But if it's a 2-minute track, we're 50 seconds in, and we have yet to hear like a real drum pattern. Like the filtering there. And so now we've finally started kind of settling in, and things are getting a little bit loud. So I would be careful. I think we can also sprinkle in more risers, right? So that things are like building and sweeps and pushes. I think we can build a little bit more into there. Also, during these kind of edit sections, you might want to be careful about delays, which are kind of carrying through that section. Might want to be careful with that. I like the filtering there. I think that's working. Riser. And make sure that kick's getting lost a little bit in the mix. And I know it's not finished yet, but pull down. You did mention in your track that it needed captivating motifs, and I'm not sure we've really gotten there. Not sure we're there. Definitely pulsing beats, intrigue into a dark scene. I think we're in good shape there. As far as darkness, I think we're okay. But and you can see, even though I've pulled, I've like reduced how many dB did I take out? So I'm 3.5, 4 dB. We're still really crushing, and it's audibly distorting. All right, you could probably do this build. You can do this build. I wonder if you can get away with that leading into here. All right, this is going to be an ugly chop. Let's see if it works. Something like that. Of course, you would need it to really push and splash over. But I think we're in good shape here. I think some of our sound choices, but the arrangement, I think, is what's going to be the most key to that. So if you're listening to the references, listening to the references, just be really careful about form, because that could get you into trouble. So thanks for sending this along, Rolf. Really, really appreciate you. Like I mentioned, this was sent along during our week 1 search, and we do searches every single week. And I call them searches, but they're weekly feedback threads. And this week we are collecting actively for week 2. And so I will be selecting one of the cues that are listed here below and featuring them on next week's podcast episode. But that's going to do it for me this week. Really, really appreciate you, and hope you enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed the year of Taxi, and again, not a commercial for Taxi. And if you're not If you're not a Taxi subscriber, or if you think Taxi is a scam, or if you're just like, nope, I did it. Like, I know Eric Copeland just released a video about Taxi. I think it's interesting that he's talking about leaving Taxi, and I'm like committing to a year of Taxi. That's all good. It's completely okay. And we have timestamps in the video, so you can skip over if you'd like. Okay, enough of the Taxi, and we won't be talking all Taxi all the time. I just wanted to spend the first week of the year talking about the brief, talking about the year of Taxi, and then moving forward. But that's going to do it for me today. You definitely want to tune in next week when our cue is really, or our topic is going to be, is one cue a week enough? And I have a theory. And my theory has to do with building the momentum. And believe it or not, when you start your career, you write one cue a week. And on the other side of your career, when you have hundreds and hundreds of placements, you will write just one cue a week. It's what happens in the middle that I want to talk about. So you want to stick around for that. Is one cue per week enough? But like I said, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much, and a huge thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Cues. Without their help, none of this would be possible. But that's going to do it for me. I hope you had a fantastic holiday. I hope you had a fantastic week 1, and I know that your week 2 is going to be amazing. How do I know that, friends? Because I know that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Just know you. The 52 Cues podcast is copyright 2023 at 18 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52cues.com.